Hello, BookTube. It's time for Arnold Bennett's second essay entitled Censorship by Libraries. The first one was published in late 1909, 23rd of December 1909, and this one was 13th of January 1910. And it appeared in the New Age, as all these do from Books and Persons, from 1908 to 1911, under the pseudonym of Jacob Tonson. The essay begins, "A number of people have been good enough to explain to me that the project of the circulating library censorship, now partially in being, did not originally concern itself with novels, and that, in the first place, it was directed against books of more or less scandalous memoirs. Of this I was aware, but in writing about the matter I especially tried to center its interest on the novel, because the novel is the only important part of the affair. For a year past I have been vying against the increasing taste for feeble naughtiness concerning king's mistresses and all that sort of tedious person, and I have remarked on the growing frequency of such words as fair, frail, lover, enchantress, etc., in the supposed to be alluring titles of books of historical immorality. I presume that these volumes are called for by the respectable as the coquette calls for creme de la menthe at the fashionable seaside hotel on a winter Sunday afternoon. Apparently the circulating libraries have also noticed the growing frequency of such words in their lists, but what they have noticed with more genuine alarm is the growing prices which clever publishers have been putting on such books. It has not escaped the observation of clever publishers that the demand by library subscribers for such books is a very real demand, and clever publishers therefore thought they might make a little bit extra on the connection by charging high for volumes brief but scandalous. The libraries thought otherwise. Hence, in truth, the attempted censorship, the now famous moral crusade of the libraries, would certainly not have occurred had not the libraries perceived in the moral pressure which was exercised upon them from lofty regions the chance of affecting economies. And there is not a circulating library that does not feel an authentic need for economies. I should have objected to the censorship even of scandalized history, for no censorship ever cured the population of bad taste. But naturally the libraries could not stop at memoirs. They had, in order to be consistent and to talk big about morality, to include novels in their scheme of scavenging. At this point, the libraries pass from futile foolishness to active viciousness, and so encounter the opposition of persons like myself, whose business it is to keep an eye on things. I can tell a true tale about one of the three great circulating libraries. A certain man of taste was directing the education in literature of a certain woman. The time came when the woman had to study Balzac. The man gave her a list of titles of novels by Balzac which she was to read. She went to the library, but could not find in the list of Balzac's complete Comedy Humaine, furnished by the library, one of the works which she had been instructed to peruse. Hearing of this, the man, whose curiosity was aroused, called at the library to conduct an inquiry. He had an interview with one of the managers, and the manager at once admitted that their complete list was not complete. "We cannot supply a work with such a title," the manager explained. The book was one of the most famous and one of the finest of 19th century novels, Splendeurs et Miseries des Courtisans, issued by Messrs. Dent and Company, surely a respectable firm, with a preface by Professor George Saintsbury, surely a respectable Mandarin, under the title The Harlot's Progress. The man of taste added, "Have you read the book?" "No," said the manager. "Have you read any of Balzac's novels?" "No," said the manager. "Do you prohibit Galsworthy's Men of Property?" "No," said the manager. "Have you read it?" "No," said the manager. "Do you prohibit Jacob Tonson's last novel?" "No," said the manager. "Have you read it?" "No," said the manager. "Well," said the man of taste, "you better read one or two of these later writers and then think over the Balzac question." The manager discreetly replied that he would consult the principal proprietor. The next morning, The Harlot's Progress, in 2 volumes, was sent round from the library. But imagine it. Imagine one of the largest circulating libraries in the world, in the year 1909, refusing to supply an established, world-admired classical work of genius because its title contains the word harlot. In no other European capital, nor in any American capital, could such a monstrously idiotic and disgusting thing happen. It is so preposterous that one cannot realize it all at once. I am a tremendous admirer of England. I have lived too long in foreign parts not to see the fineness of England. But in matters of hypocrisy, there is really something very wrong within this island. And the atmosphere of this island is thick enough to choke all artists dead. You can walk up and down the Strand to see photographs of celebrated living harlots all over the place. You can buy them on picture postcards for your daughter. You can see their names even on the posters of high-class weekly papers. You can entertain them at the most select fashionable restaurants. Indeed, the shareholders of fashionable restaurants would look very blue without the said harlots. Only they aren't called harlots. But if you desire to read a masterpiece of social fiction, some mirror of crass stupidity in a circulating library will try to save you from yourself. Up Yorkshire way, the opponents of freedom have been dealing more effective blows at the library's censorship. They doubtless imagine that they have been supporting the library censorship, but they are mistaken. Hull has distinguished itself. It is a strange and interesting place. I only set foot in it once. The day was Sunday, and I arrived by sea. I was informed that a man could not get a shave in Hull on Sunday, but I did get one. At the last meeting of the Hull Libraries Committee, when Anne Veronica was under discussion, Canon Lambert procured for the name of Lambert a free advertisement throughout the length and breadth of the country by saying, "I would just as soon send a daughter of mine to a house infected with diphtheria or typhoid fever as to put the book into her hands." I doubt it. I can conceive that if it came to the point, Canon Lambert's fear of infection and regard for his own canonical skin might move him to offer his daughter Anne Veronica in preference to diphtheria and typhoid fever. Canons who give expression to this kind of babblement must expect that they get what they get in the way of responses. Let the canon now turn the other cheek in a Christian spirit, and I will see what I can do for him. Nevertheless, to say Anne Veronica was banned from the free public libraries of Free Hull. But I call the following from the Hull Daily Mail. A local bookseller has 13 orders for Anne Veronica on Monday, 30 on Tuesday, and scores since. Previously, he had no demand. Canon Lambert in every town would demolish the censorship in less time than it took for the Hebrew deity to create the world and the fig tree. Canon Lambert, doubtless unconsciously, went wide of the point. The point was not a code for the parental treatment of Canon's daughters. England was not waiting for information as to what Canon Lambert would do to a Miss Lambert in a given dilemma. H.G. Wells did not turn up in Hull with a Gatling gun and, turning it on the canon's abode, threaten to blow the ecclesiastical wigwam to pieces if the canon did not immediately buy a copy of Anne Veronica for his daughter to read. Nobody wants to interfere between the canon and a Miss Lambert. All that quiet people want to do is be left alone to treat their daughters according to their lights. Does Canon Lambert hold that the Hull libraries are to contain no volumes which he would not care for his daughter to read? The Hull Daily Mail has, I regret to say, taken the side of the canon. This is a pity. The Hull paper should be a little more careful about the letters it prints. In a recent issue, it allowed the correspondent to call Anne Veronica pornographic, which is the most distinctly libelous. But possibly the correspondents and the newspaper felt themselves secure in Mr. Wells' disdain. Anne Veronica is not pornographic. It is not even indecent. It is utterly decent from end to end. It is also utterly honest. It is not one of Mr. Wells' major productions, But if a work of an honorable and honored artist is to be damned because it happens to be inferior to other works of the same artist, Hall ought to consider the awful case of measure for measure. By the way, would Canon Lambert as soon send a Miss Lambert to a house infected with mumps as put measure for measure into her hands? The Hull Daily Mail, taken to task, sheltered itself behind Mr. Clement Shorter and the Sphere. I will not discuss Mr. Shorter's singular pronouncement upon Anne Veronica, because I am in a very good humour with him just now for his exceedingly acid remarks upon the success of literature of Mr. Peter Carey. But I may remark that Mr. Shorter did not advocate the censoring of the book, nor did he come within 7 Irish miles of describing it as pornographic. Canonical people have tried to make capital out of the fact that Anne Veronica is not to be found in the public libraries of sundry large towns, but the reason may not be connected with the iconoclasm of Anne Veronica. In an interview, Mr. T.W. Hand, the librarian of Leeds, said, "I haven't read the book through. Why not? Though I have seen it, and we haven't got it in any of our libraries in Leeds. The reason for this is not the character of the book, but the fact that we never purchase our novels until they have become cheaper. Charming confession, a subscription ought to be open for poverty-stricken Leeds, which must wait to buy an English book that is or will be translated into every European language until it has become cheaper." A few weeks ago, the country was laughing at Little Beverley because its fathers publicly decided to purchase no fiction less than a year old. But are the great towns any better off? Literary censorship in the intellectual center of the world, I need hardly say that. I mean Boston, Massachusetts. Boston is the city of Harvard University. It is also the city of the Atlantic Monthly. It is also the city of Emerson, Lowell, Longfellow, and Holmes. Boston has a public library. It is supposed to be one of the finest public libraries in the world or any other. Great artists such as Puvis de Chavanes and John Sargent have helped to decorate the Boston Library. In brief, Boston and its library are not to be sneezed at. A certain woman asked Mr. George Moore's for Mr. George Moore's Esther Waters, recognized, I believe, as one of the most serious and superb of modern novels. The work was included in the catalogue of the library. In reply to her request, she was informed that she could not have Esther Waters unless she obtained from the chief mandarin or librarian special permission to read it on the ground that she was a student of literature. I doubt whether the imagination of the nincompoops and boards of management has ever devised anything more beautiful than this. But the lady had a husband, and the husband, being a prominent journalist, had the editorial use of a newspaper in Boston. He began to make inquiries, and he discovered that many of the catalog cards were marked with red stars, and that a star signified that the work described on the card was not generally fit for general circulation. He further discovered that works rankly and frankly pornographic and works of distinguished art were starred with the same star. Lastly, he discovered that the chief mandarin or librarian, all out of his own head and off his own bat, had appointed a reading committee for the dividing of modern fiction into sheep and goats, and that the said committee consisted exclusively of Boston dames mature in years. He expressed the entire affair in exposed the entire affair in his newspaper and made a very pleasing sensation. The first result was that his wife was afterwards received at the library with imperial honors and given to understand by kowtowing sub-mandarins that she might have the whole Red Star Library sent home to her house if she so desired. There was no other result. The rest of the reading Boston remained under the motherly but autocratic care of ces dames. Those skilled in the artistic records of Boston may remember that the management of the same library once refused the offered gift of a statue of a woman holding a baby on the sole ground that the woman was not attired. More interesting information has accrued to me concerning literary censorship in the British provinces. Glasgow has about a dozen leading libraries, chiefly, I believe, of the Carnegie species. In none of these are the works of Richardson, Fielding, and Smollett allowed a place. Further, Anne Karenina, Resurrection, Tess, and Jude the Obscure, and Tono Bungay are banned. Further, and still more droll, in the words of correspondent who has been good enough to send me all sorts of particulars, a few days ago I applied at the Mitchell Library, a reference library in the centre of town, for Whitman's poems. The attendant procured the volume, but before handing it to me consulted one of the senior librarians. This official scrutinized me from a distance of about 8 yards and finally nodded his head in acquiescence. The book was then given to me. On the back of it, a little red label was affixed. I made inquiry and discovered that books with these labels are only given to those persons, what shall I say, good moral appearance. Nevertheless, we ought to be thankful that we live in Britain. The case of the United States is in some respects far worse than ours. The egregious Sir Robert Anderson has just explained in Blackwood how he established a sort of unofficial censorship of morals in the English post office. In the United States, an official censorship of mailed matter exists, and the United States Post Office can and does regularly examine the literature entrusted to it, and can and does reject what it deems inimical in the morals of the native land of Jay Gould, James Gordon Bennett, J.D. Rockefeller, and the regretted Harriman. Among other matter which the United States Post Office censorship has recently excluded are the following items: an extract from an article in the Fortnightly Review, an extract from Man and Superman, an article in favor of freedom of the press reprinted from the Boston's Women's Journal, an article by Lady Florence Dixie reprinted from a Scottish country paper. On one occasion, the editor of Lucifer had occasion to mention that adultery and fornication had not been criminal offences in England since 1660. The authorities were so aghast at the idea that this information being allowed to creep out that they insisted that the passage being deleted. It was. Further, the editor of an American paper on it being suggested to him that he should reprint portions of the criticism of Measure for Measure by Mr. A.B. Walkley in the Times, refused to do so for fear of prosecution. Perhaps the most truly American instance of all this misfortune that befell the Reverend Mabel McCoy Irwin. The excellent lady began to publish a paper advocating strict chastity for both sexes. It was excluded from the mails on the ground that no allusion to sex could be tolerated. I reckon this anecdote to be the most exquisitely perfect of all anecdotes that I have ever come across in the diverting history of moral censorship. There is a subtle flavor about that name Mabel McCoy Irwin, which is indescribably opposite. McCoy. It is a wonderful world. I am much indebted to an American correspondent for these delights. So that ends the article, but I just sort of realized that it's actually over several, because there's different dates here, which I never noticed before. And the same as the first one as well. Like this one, the first part starts out 13th of January, and then 13th of January, and then 14th of February, 24th of February. No, that was 24th, not 14th. 24th. 24th. 3rd of March. And the 26th of May. Yeah, 26th of May. But yeah, they put it all together under the one title because they're all to deal with censorship. And it actually works quite well. It does jump in those places when after hindsight thinking of it. But I love this one better than the first one. Some of those things that he was talking about are just too true and still going on. So we'll have another essay tomorrow. Take care, BookTube.